To really get a handle on India's economy today, we've got to go back in time. Not just a few years, but all the way back to the 2 centuries of British rule that literally shaped the nation we know. The challenges and the successes of modern India, well, they didn't just pop up out of nowhere. Their roots were planted long, long ago.
And that brings us to the big question, right? How did 200 years of foreign rule fundamentally rewire an entire subcontinent's economy? Because this wasn't just a political change, it was a complete economic overhaul, and its effects are still being felt even today. To really understand what happened, we need to get this one key term down: economic colonialism. This wasn't just about planting flags and having new rulers. At its absolute core, the goal was to make India's economy work for Britain. And, as we're about to see, pretty much every major decision was made with that one single objective in mind.
Okay, so how was an entire economy reshaped so completely? Well, it wasn't a single event. It was a slow, deliberate process. Let's break down exactly how it was done, piece by piece.
This whole process really unfolded in 3 distinct phases. At first, it was all about trade, with Britain just acting like another merchant. But then, as its own industrial revolution kicked into high gear, the strategy changed. India was transformed into a supplier of raw materials for all those new British factories. And the final phase? That was all about financial control, using investments in the banking system to lock in that economic dominance for good.
To see the impact of all this up close, we have to start with the absolute backbone of the economy: agriculture. This is how most people lived, how they worked, and it's where these new colonial policies hit the hardest.
Just let this number sink in for a second. 85%. That's how much of the population depended, directly or indirectly, on agriculture for their survival. The fate of the farms was quite literally the fate of the nation.
But here's the crazy part. Even with so many people depending on it, agriculture was completely stuck. For decades in the early 20th century, the crop yield, so the amount of food grown per acre, was basically flat. It went nowhere. The whole sector was just trapped in stagnation.
So why? What caused this stagnation? Well, a huge reason is right here on the screen. British policy forced a massive shift in what was being grown. Farmers were pushed away from growing food crops like wheat and rice for their own communities, and instead they were pushed towards growing cash crops like cotton and indigo that were needed for British factories.
And the tragic irony of it all was that this big shift to commercial farming didn't make India richer. It was the opposite. A nation full of farmers suddenly became vulnerable to food shortages and actually had to rely on imports. The whole system was designed for Britain's profit, not for India's survival.
Now, this story wasn't just playing out in the fields. A very similar thing was happening in India's workshops and its industries. See, before the British really took control, India was a global manufacturing hub, but colonial rule flipped that narrative completely on its head.
India was world famous for its incredible high-quality textiles and handicrafts, but the British brought in a deliberate policy of deindustrialization. The goal was simple: systematically take apart these local industries so they couldn't possibly compete with the machine-made goods that were flooding in from factories in Britain.
This created a very simple and very exploitative cycle. Step 1, India exports cheap raw materials, like cotton. Step 2, Britain's factories turn that cotton into expensive finished goods, like cloth. And step 3, those exact same goods were shipped back and sold to a captive Indian market.
The great nationalist leader, Dadabhai Naoroji, had a famous name for this: the drain of wealth. And that's exactly what it was: a massive, one-way transfer of capital. This wealth didn't just vanish, it was funneled directly into Britain, paying for its industrial growth and its imperial ambitions, all while crippling India's own ability to develop.
Now, these economic policies weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They had a devastating human cost, and you can see that really clearly when you look at the demographic data from that time. The picture was bleak, to say the least. Colonial India was marked by incredibly high birth rates, but also incredibly high death rates. Life expectancy was shockingly low, just 32 years in the 1930s, and mass illiteracy was the norm. These are all the classic signs of an economy where the standard of living for the average person was just abysmal.
A really important turning point came in 1921. It's known as the Great Divide. Before this year, as you can see, both birth and death rates were high, which meant the population grew pretty slowly. But after 1921, something changed. Birth rates stayed high, but death rates started to fall. And this created a massive population explosion that would go on to define India for decades.
Okay, but what about the positives? We always hear about the railways, the roads, the ports that were built during British rule. Surely that was a genuine contribution to India's progress, right?
Well, when you look at the evidence, the primary motive was not India's development. This infrastructure was really a tool for colonial control. The railways, they were built to move raw materials out and the army in. The roads connected the resource-rich areas to the railway stations. The entire network was designed from the ground up to serve British interests, tightening their economic and military grip on the country. So, after 2 centuries of all these policies, what did the Indian economy actually look like in 1947, right at the moment of independence? What kind of legacy did this whole system leave behind?
The economy was caught in what you might call a vicious cycle of poverty. The stagnation led to extremely low incomes. Low incomes meant people couldn't save money. And with no savings, there was no capital to invest in new industries or infrastructure, which just locked the country deeper into that state of poverty. So, in 1947, this was the inheritance. An economy with basically no real growth in income per person. A standard of living that was tragically low. An industrial sector that was deliberately held back. And a huge growing population that was totally dependent on a shattered agricultural system. And this leaves us with one final and really crucial question. Starting from this foundation of stagnation and dependency, what kind of monumental challenges would a newly independent India have to overcome to even begin building a modern economy for its people?